yeah, wanted to chat to you about some news and a post that you tweeted about, or an article that you tweeted about today, Financial Times article, and about how they kind of keep getting it wrong in terms of referring to Bitcoin and crypto as the same thing. Would you mind just kind of sharing a little bit about that? We should have a screen share of your post too.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Financial Times ran this piece, and the heading just suggested that companies were piling into Bitcoin, or struggling companies were piling into Bitcoin. And it sounded like it was really bullish for adoption and for Bitcoin. But when you look a little bit closer, the story repeatedly swaps in and out of Bitcoin and crypto as if they're the same thing, but they're clearly not. And the problem is then when you mix these two things, or these two different cryptos in with each other, like for example with Solana or Ethereum, it really does muddy the waters, because like we've discussed many times, Bitcoin is a decentralized protocol, whereas these other tokens are VC companies. And when you lump them together under the same label, it just risks people not being able to ever separate the two. And if a Financial Times journalist can't separate the two in an article that should be edited and read and approved and researched, then I don't know what chance other people do. And the problem is these sloppy mainstream narratives end up finding their way into our laws. So I know that a lot of the narratives that have been in the news, Bitcoin's energy consumption, etc., it finds its way. Found its way into MiCA legislation, and it finds its way into the FCA legislation, because they just parrot the same old, tired, ill-informed narratives that they always have done. Then you have our policymakers and our MPs reading this, thinking that there's credibility in these news outlets, and unfortunately the result is that nobody understands it properly.
Yeah, I do think it's incredibly, I was going to say dangerous, and I was like, is dangerous the right word? But it can be, because it really muddies the water, like you say, and it confuses people. In their defense, and I actually haven't read the Financial Times article itself, but there are companies who are adopting Ethereum strategies and other, they are buying other crypto assets, not just Bitcoin, for their company treasuries. And so in their defense, and I haven't read it, so I could be completely wrong, there are some companies that are doing that and using coins like Ethereum. So is it that, but it seems like from what you're saying, they're just constantly back and forth as if we're talking about the same, it's just using the words interchangeably, not being specific about this company which holds Bitcoin, this company which holds, and then they're talking about other companies that are exclusively, altcoins in their treasury. So do you know what I mean? Like, I wonder whether, it seems like probably from the author or the journalist, there is confusion, but there are companies, in their defense, there are companies who do hold other cryptos that are adopting sort of crypto treasury strategies. So they're kind of not completely wrong, but they're just confused it a bit.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. There are companies that do use or have these as treasury assets. Not many though, but a company that is buying Bitcoin as a long-term reserve asset is a completely separate thing to something that's speculative, highly volatile, and will probably go to zero. So if they are going to talk about these two things being as completely different as they are, that should be made clear. But I do absolutely take your point. And yes, there will be some companies that are putting these on their balance sheets also.
Have you ever kind of reached out to these specific journalists just to kind of help clarify things in their mind? And how has that gone historically?
So actually, probably one of the most well-known times that I've done this is a man called Chris Valance, who wrote the article, Every Bitcoin Payment Uses a Swimming Pool's Worth of Water. So I tried to reach out to him and to their crypto correspondent at the BBC. This was a BBC article, by the way. And I tried to explain where the issues were and tried to understand how they'd done their fact checking, and offered my services, and even offered to help them in the future to fact check their articles, but they don't respond. I mean, Chris completely ignored me, and I had to go through a very, very painful 13-month process trying to hold them accountable for this article, which was absolutely impossible because they sent me down every possible dead end that there could have been. Contact Ofcom, go down the freedom of information request route, which is crazy because journalism under the BBC is protected. So if you ever put a freedom of information request in and ask them for anything to do about journalism with the BBC, they don't have to respond. I think that in itself is really quite telling. So I went through all these different processes, filled in multiple forms through many. It even got to the stage where they couldn't accept the rebuttal that I had managed to get written by the Digital Assets Research Institute, and I had to post it to them. I mean, they make it really, really hard. And this went on for 13 months until I went through to the absolute end point where they just came back to me and said, no, that's it. We can't help you. And I easily proved that the source of that particular article was written by a Dutch central banker who had been discredited in 2018. That conflict of interest had not been disclosed, but everything that they wrote in the article was provably wrong. And so even under those circumstances and trying to knock at their door and banging it down, they won't ever engage. But I did see on X that somebody did actually tag the journalist into my post, and so far they haven't engaged or responded.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the BBC incident, that sounds so frustrating and is a outrageous amount of time to have to just sort of kind of get them to look at it. I can see why you're kind of lost faith in a way with the BBC in terms of that. But yeah, I do think that, I mean, that was an example of one organisation and one journalist. Hopefully, maybe if it's just like an ongoing thing of, there are good journalists out there, and there will be people that want to kind of, if they are faced with other information, are open to it and open to learning. So I wonder if that's just like a part of it, and hopefully this might get some kind of response, because like you say, or you have said, it really is about education, and yeah, you are there to kind of explain and break down the importance of just being clear and correct and understanding the difference between a Bitcoin treasury company and a company that is buying Ethereum and the reasons behind that.
I would very much like to think that they are open to learn. However, when you look at how poor the Bitcoin narrative has been and how poor the journalism has been around it for the entire time that Bitcoin has been written about, it's really hard to believe that they do want to learn, because all of the articles are so misleading and factually incorrect. There's this fantastic website called Bitcoin Perception, and they analyze Bitcoin coverage over mainstream media outlets. So the Financial Times, the Daily Mail, the BBC. And when you look at the coverage, you can see that most of it is negative. There's a slither of balanced and very little positive. Well, I know that there's a lot of positive information out there about Bitcoin. We know that it's a freedom tech. We know that it saves people from authoritarian regimes. We know that it can mitigate methane. We know that it can help a demand response and build out renewables. We know that it can build out infrastructure in Africa when they've got stranded resources. We know that there's an infinite amount of amazing use cases for this global, borderless, decentralized, neutral asset. But when you look at the coverage from these mainstream media outlets, you can clearly see that they're not covering any of those aspects. They'd rather go with the guy that lost the landfill, his Bitcoin in a landfill, or some other piece that, like, for example, it's so silly that Bitcoin mining doesn't even use water, and to say that every payment uses a swimming pool's worth of water is absolute insanity. And when you actually read that article, they kept using the term payment and transaction interchangeably, and that actually changes things quite considerably. So they didn't even understand the terms then. So I would like to think that they do want to learn. I'm always here to help people if they do ever want to run anything past me or be a censor check, but unfortunately, from what I've seen, I haven't seen any evidence of that.
Altcoins surged Tuesday afternoon after Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent suggested the Federal Reserve should consider a larger interest rate cut in September. Speaking to Fox News, Bessent floated the idea of a 50 basis point cut, that's half a percentage point, at the Fed's next meeting. He said the central bank could have moved sooner in June if it had more accurate economic data, calling that gap in information a foundational issue. So I guess the question here for you, Susie, and curious to get your thoughts is, why do you think altcoins are having a moment? Is this concerning? Is it concerning that people are kind of trusting and dabbling in these altcoins now?
Well, you need to get wrecked before you actually learn. So it's part of the process. I mean, it looks like alts are rallying just based on the Fed cut speculation, but history shows that these pumps are really short-lived and very, very temporary. And we know that most cryptos will ultimately go to zero as the liquidity dries up. And I don't know, I just think that it's a learning journey for a lot of people. And we haven't actually had a proper altcoin season. I didn't think it would come back. It still may not properly. So I just think this is just a little temporary little bounce.
So the altcoin season was, when was that? Like 2019, 2018, 2019? Was that when it was?
There might have been a huge, great big pump in 2021. I mean, the thing is whatever you put in, whichever alt you bought then, you almost couldn't lose because of the amount of money that was being pumped into the system. So everybody felt like they're a genius. And I think that's when crypto really started to take off, because people were buying these alts, making so much money and actually feeling like they were winning, and then everything crashed and they all thought it was going to come back, and it never did. It's just very, very disappointing for people, but they need to learn, and hopefully this will lead them to understand the difference between Bitcoin and crypto, and why crypto is not risky, and why all other cryptos like these VC companies are very, very high risk.
So yeah, Bitcoin is less risky than the other ones, which are very high risk. The altcoins, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.